Are you one of the 64% of Christian men who watches pornography? Maybe you're one of the over 28,000 that is viewing it every second. On this week's Not Your Average Man podcast, we are honored to welcome Matt Cline. Matt is the founder of Restored Ministries and is a leading voice in Canada on pornography. His teachings have reached thousands of people in over 70 countries. Matt has made it his life's mission to help people break free from the darkness that pornography is and get back into the light. If you are held captive to all the destruction of pornography, it's time to find your freedom. And if you're not, it's almost a guarantee you know someone who is. So listen for you, listen for them. Freedom and hope is there to be found. Take it and share it. Join us for part one of this two-part series. Well, hey guys, welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Man. We are in for a special treat. We've been threatening to have guests on for a while, and boom, now we do. we are honored to have Matt Cline from Restored Ministries on with us. We're going to be we've talked about needing to jump in, or that's what we'll do is we will talk about the real stuff, the hard stuff. And Matt is absolutely one of those people whom we needed to have on the episode in order to breach a hot topic and a very important topic that's causing devastation. Is that too strong, Matt?
No, that's accurate.
It's causing devastation in with men, in relationships, in the church. So Matt, can you briefly give us an overview of your ministry and what you're doing and what you're all about?
Sure. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. I know you say it's a threat. I hope it's not too much of a punishment for people to listen to us for a half hour, however long we go, but try to make it exciting and bring some fun to it, talking about porn and this devastating topic of porn, sexual immorality. And that's what we do with Restored Ministries. Talk about just help people through porn addiction, through infidelity in marriage, through lots of sexual abuse comes up. And so whatever somebody's sexual addiction or sexual bondage is, we'll walk with them and we'll help them through. And so we've now multiplied and we've got group leaders and different people doing one-on-one things. And it's just a lot of fun seeing the transformation. I mean, the stories that we hear of like the depth of depravity that people get into, it never ceases to amaze me. It's so sad and so devastating. But then the transformation is so exciting when people can finally get free of this stuff and realize really who they are in God's eyes and start to live out a purpose and a life of peace. It's really, really cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome, brother. What a great place to or a vantage point. Is that the wrong kind?
It's not a great place.
Yeah, it's not a great place, but a vantage point to see God at work. And like you said, that the transformation, that the testimonies, being able to see people brought from darkness into light, how incredible is that? And I've joked in the past, it's a necessary skill and it's a needed skill, but when people are starting to learn how to communicate better as a couple, it's usually not like from darkness to light, but something as insidious as pornography and where that will lead. I've always said that sin will always take us further than we ever wanted to go, and it will always cost us more than we ever wanted to pay.
That's right. It's a crazy thing. One of the questions that I always ask people is if God were to describe you in a sentence, what would he say? And pretty much 100% of the time, what they say is based on their sexual sin. And God sees me as a project. I'm just trying to work, or he's trying to work on me, and I'm getting in the way of perfection, or he sees me as a hypocrite because I've been living this double life for so long. And this sexual sin, it defines us in our own minds, not in God's eyes, but in our own minds, it defines us. And people really get caught up in the darkness of it because it is so enticing. We all have a sex drive.
Sure.
We all have these desires, and it's so isolated and done in secret so often that people just get stuck even from a young age, right? And then it's 30, 40, 50 years. People are stuck in this stuff sometimes and stuck in silence, and people just don't know. And so when something's in the dark, it always grows and festers. And that's the really cool thing that I love is seeing people all the time say, well, I've never told anybody this, but there's the first time I've ever told somebody this. And then they confess these secrets. and they're finally getting it out. And it leads me to be on calls with other men, and we're just both crying on both sides of the camera. And it's just so beautiful seeing freedom come. And even a month ago, I remember it was a first coaching call in our one-on-one program, first coaching call with this guy, and everything he says about himself is negative, every single thing. And I was having him just pray and actually listen to the Lord, and he just started weeping. And he was dealing with anger, and he was telling me about different people in his life and his family that he was angry towards. And he just started weeping, though, when God spoke to him. And he said, grace, God has grace for me. He just said the word grace. And it was this moment of breakthrough, because all of a sudden he wasn't negative towards himself. He was receiving the love of God. And that starts to bring the darkness out of our lives, and we can start walking in freedom. So the process it's really cool and transformative. And it's like you're saying, there's reasons that God has different ministries, and some ministries are fantastic for marriage and for communication issues. And we don't touch on that a lot. It comes up because you're recovering in marriage after this stuff. But when we can get secrets out of people and work on past abuse and childhood trauma and stuff like that led to addiction, it's pretty profound to see the transformation. I just love it.
So is that like the first of all, you're like in the muck of the trenches, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of ministries like our ministry too. And we do deal with porn because it is a problem that's rampant, but that's not our like niche or niche. I don't know how you say it, whatever. I'm not French or wherever it comes from. So anyway, but that's just something that we hit on. That's not that we're going after that. And you guys are going after it, which I love. I just think it's amazing. But my question after saying all that was, do you try to get them first? Like, of course, you're going to tackle the porn addiction, like whatever that may look like. But do you try to get them to change their identity, basically? Like you were just explaining that story. So is that like the first thing you attack? Kind of like stop being so negative, receive that God is so much bigger than anything you've done. And he's right there. So, I mean, is that like the first step?
Our very first video in our main program, Pure Freedom Journey, which has 52 weeks of videos, the very first one is called Making the Bible Come Alive. And so teaching how to read the Bible in a way that it comes alive, but that it's personal to you. And so what is God revealing about the way he sees you in scripture? And so, yeah, it is. To answer your question, identity is the first thing that we tackle, because when you can understand that you're not just some dirty pervert, but you're actually an accepted, beloved child of God, well, then all of a sudden the stuff that you've done doesn't define you. It's easier to get it out. But when the stuff that you've done you think defines you, how could you get it out? Because you're telling the world who you are. And so you have to understand your identity in God and how he sees you. Because if you realize, like, okay, I'm fully accepted and fully loved by the one who matters above all. Well, okay, I can talk about the sin. And even if somebody doesn't understand my sin, I'm still accepted by him. And one of the key verses that I always go to, because it was personal for me, is 1 Peter 2, verse 4. And it talks about that we're rejected by man, but we're chosen and precious by God, or in the view of God. And chosen and precious to God, I guess. And I always say to guys, we just often stop at, I was rejected by man. And boom, that's my identity. My wife rejected me. My parents rejected me. But after the comma is so important, but you're chosen, you're precious to God. And can we dwell on that and understand that love is so real, even though we've done what we've done? And so it's a beautiful starting place to really just soften things and have people receive the love of God, which I think that's biblical. I think that's what God does. He wants to overwhelm us with his love, and in that push the darkness out of our life.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's awesome. Just what a great thing to be a part of, to be the hands and feet to take. I don't know. I want to say center stage, but you're not God's center stage. But to be in the muck and being willing to walk through that with people, and just to see the freedom. One of my favorite verses is this. I forget the reference now, but where Jesus says that I've come to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captive free.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're speaking that to me, that's what I'm hearing. It's just these people who have been held in captivity, held in shame, the secrets, the isolation, and then there's freedom that's available to them. That's so incredible.
And you're talking about muck, and I'll kind of jump in here and hold on to your question if you got one, but we don't just talk about porn. We talk about then masturbation. But we give a lot of biblical teaching on masturbation. People are like, oh, it's not mentioned in the Bible. It's not, but you can get a lot out of it. I think it's our most popular podcast episode actually is masturbation. I think it's helpful or harmful. And people just want to know. But that's so freeing because there's so many people that have come to us like, well, my pastor, my Christian counselors told me masturbation was okay, but you guys are saying maybe it's not. Like there's this tension. So when people can actually understand God's design is that all sexual acts are between a man and a woman in marriage. Like God makes it very clear in the Bible what his design is, what his view is for positive sexual behavior. And it's a man and a woman together in marriage. Masturbation doesn't fall into that category. So clearly it's outside God's design. He doesn't need to waste ink on it. It's very clear. What that means is that when we have these urges, the reason I get sad about people justifying it is that when we have these urges, it's an opportunity for us to seek the Lord and understand his peace and his love and the way that he can satisfy us on a deeper level. And so when we just go, oh, well, I don't know what the Bible says about it, or maybe it's okay if I just don't watch porn. Well, you're missing an opportunity to understand God's strength and your weakness and grow in that intimacy. And so we talk about that. And then on a deeper level, even, man, we go hard into fantasies. And what do fantasies tell you about the state of your heart? And, it's shameful a lot of times for people to confess porn. But once they've gotten it out, and say in our ministry, we've got these groups of guys or girls that meet together. You're meeting together. Obviously, all of you guys have struggled with this stuff, journeying together for a while. To confess that, oh, hey, guys, I watched porn once this week. It's not the biggest stretch. But to confess that was same-sex porn, or that it's incestual porn, or it's porn with animals, that stuff is the fantasy in your heads. And so we go hard into what the fantasies are for each person, but also what that shows us. Because a lot of times that comes from like a lack of nurturing from your mom. That happens all the time. And so you're not nurtured by your mom. So you always, you look at porn with older women in positions of authority. I mean, that pattern is constant. There's people that they're sexually abused as a child and they never have told anybody, they've never dealt with it. And so the porn use that they seek out is like, it's aggressive or it's dominating or those kinds of things. And it's so fascinating. It often directly mimics the abuse that was 25, 30 years ago in their life. Yeah. And so when you cannot go into the fantasies, it goes into pains and hurts in your heart that you just never dealt with. And so it can identify things that maybe you can get help with. Whereas if you're just trying to quit porn, but you're not understanding what the fantasies show you about the state of your heart, you can quit porn, but your heart can still be a mess. And so we want people to be healthy in like holistically and on a real level. And it's really amazing to go into the depths of that stuff and see the Lord work. So when you talk about the muck, it's like, porn is messy, but there's a lot more to it. And we try to hit it all as much as we can.
Great. Because it's so true. Like I've talked to guys and it's only like, how do I quit this because I want to stay married? Right? Like it's, how do I quit this because I want to be right with God? But it's not, what's the deeper issue? Like, why is it even a problem? Right. And I've never asked, like, honestly, I've never asked what kind you get into. Like, I've never asked that. I've never even thought about it. Like, because I've always just been like, well, you have to stop, but it needs to be for the right reasons. And then I've had guys that say, just like you said, you can quit porn. Like you can go cold turkey and you could be good for a year and then relapse. And because you're not dealing with the true, it's almost like a cancer, right? Like if you don't actually remove that, then it's just going to come back. I mean, I'm not a doctor, clearly. That's why I'm on here. But but you'll just keep like festering that instead of actually getting to the root. I love that. I guess I've never actually like really thought about that, but it makes so much sense. And then the holistic approach, because yeah, I was told one time, I was in a big men's group and porn was an issue. And it was like, okay, when you feel that temptation, then go for a run, do some push-ups. It was like all these, like, I don't know, it was just kind of like one habit for the other, which wasn't bad. But I was like, well, why don't we get into like, maybe you don't have to sub it for something. Like, why don't we just stop? Like, why don't we learn more? And I love that holistic approach that you're talking about. That is amazing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, one of the things with that, we would teach, instead of going for a run, which is that the worst thing? No, you can go for a run. That's fine. But just don't ignore it, right? Like ignoring or suppressing things just makes it grow, or it makes your body carry stress and even shame. Like shame literally creates a weight in all of our organs in our body and creates more like a hunchback look as you get older if you carry shame. So you can like go for a run, but if you're not dealing with the shame and the pain, you got to get that stuff out too. And so we would teach, like, what's the longing of your heart? Like you might be tempted to masturbate. You might be tempted to go watch pornography, but what are you looking for? Like, are you stressed and you're looking for peace? Or are you lonely and you're looking for connection? For me, I felt insignificant a lot. I felt like there was no purpose to my life. And so what's really the point? Like, this is pleasurable. Why would I quit? And so I didn't feel like I had significance. And so what is the thing that you're longing for in your heart? Because we'll always talk about triggers, and people talk about halt. Like halt is a trigger, like HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Well, those are all kind of like negative. So what's on the flip side of that? If you're lonely, you're looking for connection. Okay, God, thank you that you are the one who loves me and I can build this connection with you. Or it's indicating a lack or a void. Like, I actually don't know how to connect with God. I got to learn this. Or, hey, I actually have healthy relationships in my life. I don't need to feel sorry for myself that I'm lonely. It's actually good to be alone sometimes. So what's the thing that you're looking for in your life, in your heart, the longing of your heart? And it's way better than just like, oh, just go do push-ups and that'll just get you through this moment of temptation. It's just it's a lot healthier of an approach. And then, like you say, once you're free, you can be free. You don't have to go back to it a year or 2 years later.
Yeah. No, exactly. You don't have to go for runs. I mean, you can get really like healthy, but only physically, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And Chris doesn't want the old ladies to keep beating him in the runs. He did a marathon, and this old lady beat him.
Or 3K, whatever.
Or
5K. Yeah, 5K. I know you were giving me points.
I was like, hey, you did 26 miles. Forgot it's only 5.
Well,
but that's what, like, Paul, that says, like, the only sin that ever is talked about with, like, when he talks about sexual sin, he's like, run away, flee. Like, you don't see that over and over again with all the other things that pop up, pride, everything that pops up that is talked about in the Bible. You never see that flee from, and then he explains in like how devastating it is. Really, it's like the sin of your own body, this whole explanation he goes through. And so with what you're saying, it's like, yeah, you can go do push-ups, whatever it is, but if you're not dealing with it, I think that's the biggest. I mean, is that, like, I just don't understand. I guess I do understand because I was in it. So I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I'll change this habit with this, but it always fails, right? Because you'll talk yourself out of a run. I talk myself out of runs all the time, the time. I'm going to go for a run. No, I'm not going to go for a run. I want to do it. Like, but or time, right? Oh, I don't have time to go do X, but I have time to squeeze this in. Like, there's all these things, but like for me, I think, and I reached out, but I didn't reach out like I should for resources. But I think for me, it was when I prioritized my relationship with God. And then everything started to, but that is the heart issue. It's not the surface issue.
Yeah.
Well,
I quit porn. I remember I was about 21 and I always thought I'd quit by the time I was married. And so I was watching porn And I said to myself, I'm like, if I want to be done by the time I'm married, there's got to be a last time. And so I was like, I want to be free for a year before I date someone. So I literally just closed the computer, didn't think about porn for like 8 months. And even when I did, like, it was very subtle, like not really a big temptation. And 2.5 years went on. I thought I was just free forever, but I never dealt with heart stuff. I got the glory. I made a good decision. I never grew in my relationship with Jesus. And so I fell back harder than ever about 2.5 years later. And I was so confused. I'm like, God, why can't I quit? I quit before. Now I can't quit. I'm like watching all the time. And I would also pray, like, God, give me, like, I want to make a difference for you. I want to impact people all over the world. And I wasn't. And so that was the longing of my heart, right? And so God came to me in a church service and he said to me, he's like, Matt, I want to use you, but you've got to get pure. Those were his words.
Oh,
and
wow.
I was like, hey, I get it. And so it was cool because he gave me an anchor. Like, he answered 2 prayers in one. Like, why can't I, like, give me something? I would pray, give me something that was strong enough to help me get free. And also, I want to be used by you. And he answered it in one. But what he was saying to me was not like, get pure and then I can use you. Like, once you don't have sin in your life, well, then finally I can use you. Like, no, we're all broken vessels.
Yeah.
But what he was saying was, I want you to get pure in your heart through seeking intimacy with me. And so the next probably 1.5 years was the most foundational time of my life, where I just was passionately in the Bible, passionately in prayer, like constantly. I'd worship. I wouldn't listen to any music. I just worshiped in my car and start fasting all the time. And just like all of these things that drew me closer to the Lord. And now I'd wake up in the night and maybe I'd be tempted and I'd just start praising him and just start talking to God. And that was the foundation for me getting free, but also for our ministry. Is it was different than the first time I was free, where it was just all me, but I never grew in my heart condition with the Lord. This time I grew in intimacy with him. And then he's able to speak to me, and he's still speaking to me about heart issues or beliefs that I've lived from that are false. And so I'm learning all of this about my heart, and that's able to now sustain freedom. So the reason Paul says flee, I think, from sexual temptation, because it's unlike any other sin, is sex is so powerful. Like, God has a covenant relationship with us, and he gives us then covenant relationship with our spouse, and it's consummated with sex. Like, that's significant. Adam and Eve, they're like in paradise, right? Like, they have everything. Imagine this as a husband and wife. You've got prosperous relationships with whoever. I guess it was with them, but it could be with anybody. You got, like, you could just be together. You've got purpose. You've got resources, and then you both screw up. Like, that would cause division in a family. That would cause division in a marriage. And Genesis 3, they get kicked out of the garden. Genesis 4, verse 1, first thing that they do when they're outside the garden, Adam knew his wife Eve, and then they gave birth to a son. So they came together, they had sex to connect with each other, because now they were under the grace of God. They were wearing the garments that he had given them. So under the grace of God, they connected, and then they fulfilled the promise of be fruitful and multiply. And so sex is so connected to both intimacy, but also purpose, to multiplying yourself and multiplying God's purpose. And so why do we need to flee from sexual sin? Because the same power that's so powerful and a positive in marriage, it's so destructive outside of that. And even chemically, like, it releases bonding chemicals in our bodies where we connect with each other. So if you're connecting with how many people outside marriage, you're literally chemically in your body connecting with these people. And so we go back to fantasies, and there's been multiple people recently. I guess one story was, he was saying to me that he has trouble just being intimate, just having sex with his wife, because in his past life, he was involved in same-sex encounters where it would just be spontaneous with other men. And he said to me, he's like, Matt, these memories are constantly in my mind. I can't stop thinking about them. And it stops me from wanting to pursue intimacy with my wife because I feel so guilty, or I can't get it up because he's got all these past encounters that he thinks about. And so the connection that we have with other people when we engage in this stuff, the power of it is so destructive. And it's for our benefit that God says to flee.
Well, and even then, I think it's Romans 1. that talks about giving us over into sexual temptation.
Mm-hmm.
That's a scary thought. That fine, I'll just give you over to this.
Yeah.
And we'll get lost in it. And you know, I've read something like you're saying, that this bonding agent, because we're either, whatever we bond to makes insiders, and whatever we're not bond to, they're outsiders. So you're either an insider or you're an outsider. And so that was one of the things that I heard is, so if you're bonding to these screens, if you're bonding to these other people, those are the insiders. Your spouse is no longer an insider; they're an outsider. So now shame, guilt, and this chemical bonding, that now you're mistreating them. You're pushing them away. You're not engaging with them because of the shame and the guilt cycle and all that fun stuff, but not fun stuff. But it's also but also they're an outsider. So the whole design, the whole purpose, and people look, well, just to have kids. No, that's not the whole purpose. But it gets blown up because the enemy twists it. The enemy takes it and says, hey, use it for this, for your anxiety, for your loneliness, for your depression, for your escape, for whatever. And then that's going to give you a benefit. That'll help you feel better. Lies.
Yeah,
All of it.
Jesus is the Prince of Peace, but no, just masturbate to have peace. That's gonna relieve your stress.
Yeah,
right?
There you go.
Exactly. That's a really good way to put it. Jesus is all these things, but the enemy says that acting out will give you all of what you want. I like how you put this.
Yeah, while we were talking right now, I was just wondering, with your ministry, why do you think that it is such a big problem within the church? Like within like actual Christ followers? Like, I mean, I'm a good example, right? Like I grew up in church. Like I went to Sunday school. I did all the things. Like I grew up in church, and I almost lost my whole family, you know, and it started with sexual sin, just a little bit of it, and then a little bit more. And then it blew up, but I knew the right answer, but I just chose to like straight up, like, I don't even care anymore. So why do you think that it is? Because I know it's a big issue in church. I mean, it's a big issue society-wise, 100%. But like, why do you think it's such a big problem in church?
Well, when you say you grew up in church, what you're saying, another way to say it is, you grew up in an atmosphere where sex was not talked about, or it was talked about in the sense of don't do it until marriage. So when you say you grew up in church, that's what you're saying. You grew up in that atmosphere, as we all did, I think. And I really believe that for so long, the church has been like the army of Israel, and porn is like Goliath. And porn just taunts God's people day and night, 40 days. I'm too big. You can't touch me. You can't talk about me. Like, you're going to defeat me. I'm a multi-billion-dollar industry. I'm all over the world. You can't touch me. And so pastors then are like the army of Israel, and they don't. And they're called to battle. And they're literally on the battlefield. They've got their armor on, and they're like, I can't do it. And there's actually a rebuke in Ezekiel 34 to shepherds. And shepherds, like God says to the shepherds, woe to you who just seek your own comfort. And he says, you're not caring and binding for the wounds, or binding up the wounds of your sheep. And so I think for a long time, pastors have been scared to talk about this, also ill-equipped, and maybe just don't understand how important it is. There's a lot of pastors older, like 50 and older, that they actually really didn't have this big struggle in their life. Every man has dealt with lust to some degree and thoughts, but as far as a porn addiction or sex addiction, a lot of the older generation really didn't have it in their own life. And so they don't really know how common it is in their congregations. But I always say to pastors, like, you've got to get equipped, because you're not just speaking to people who struggle. Like in the church, we're supposed to equip the saints to go and bring the message of God out into the world. And so you might be speaking to a 60, 70-year-old grandma who has never had the struggle, but she's able to then talk to her kids, who can then talk to their kids. And she's influencing 2 generations below, because the pastor talked to her about pornography and what's going on in this world. And so pastors need to understand that Goliath and pornography wants to scare the church into silence, and wants to scare us into inaction. And it just takes one guy, right? Like
Mhm.
David says the battle is the Lord's. The battle was always the Lord's. For the 40 days before David got there, it was always the Lord's. But God wanted one person to take a step into the fight. And I always say this to pastors too, when you preach about it on a Sunday, clear your calendar for that week, because you're going to have people reaching out with you and wanting to meet with you because they don't know where else to go. And they're so stuck in their secret sin. And there might be people on your worship team or people volunteering, people on your staff, people on your board. And I mean, that happens all the time. And they're struggling. There's a guy, I was just working with him recently, and he was on a board. I think he still is on the board at his church. He might have stepped down, but he molested his stepdaughter, and was out of all of these years of pornography and looking at younger women. And then his daughter, who he had a great relationship with, and she loved him, she grew up into an older teenager, and what happened. And so he crossed the line even legally, and he's on the board at a church, and nobody knows. Nobody would know what he did. And so that's why I think, to answer your question, Brad, is that the church has been so silent on it, so scared to talk about it. And so when we talk about it, we've got to understand, like, sex, every pastor will say, sex is powerful. Sex is a beautiful gift from God. But that's not what we talk about on Sundays from stage. This beautiful, powerful gift from God we don't talk about. Yeah. There's a lot of power and beauty in this that we can talk about. Let's talk about what God's design is, not just save it till marriage. And that's our message. Don't watch porn. That's it. So there's a lot to talk about. We've just got to understand the times that we're living in, and we've got to address the battle that we're facing.
Yeah. Guys, we really hope you've been enjoying part 1 of our interview with Matt Cline with Restored Ministries. We have links to connect to restoredministries.ca in the show notes. Make sure you catch the rest of this powerful message next week as Matt shares more of what you can do to walk in freedom, including a special offer for the Not Your Average Man community. Stand together, be there for each other, step out into the light so you can be better than your average man. We look forward to seeing you next week.